there we go. Splendid round into the pepperoni. Welcome to tonight's spoiler review stream. First of all, I do want to say a few thanks to a few follows that happened for the past few days and just right now. Rod Johnson, thank you for the follow. Also, thank you MTG Joe D, who followed me a day ago, as well as Jay Sheen, who followed me a day ago, as well as Mercure Blue, who followed me a day ago. So, thank you for the follows. Let's actually get started on talking about these cards that got spoiled over the weekend, because there's actually some pretty cool cards that got spoiled. First of all, Scryfall calls it the first snowman, but the translation's like Free Seasons. We really don't know the official translation yet, but it's a Simic, so just green and blue for an Enchantment Saga. It has mill 3 cards. Step 2, return up to 2 snow permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. And step 3, choose up to 3 cards in each graveyard. Their owner shuffle those cards into their library. Into their libraries. So, this is interesting because there's a few things about this card that is quite fascinating. First of all, it's a self-mill piece, so if you're kind of like having a reanimated-based strategy, like if you're in Sultai, which a lot of people have been contemplating on, this being just a self-mill piece for that strategy is actually kind of nice. Also, step 2, you return up to 2 snow permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. That could be used as a variation of either ramp or filtering, because you could return snow lands, you could return some of the powerful snow creatures that we have seen in the green and the blue colors, so that's something to keep in mind, as well as snow enchantments, etc., etc. So that one, I think that one might be the one that might be the trickiest still to trigger, even if you're an all snow deck, because unless all of your permanents are snow, not just your lands, like all the permanents, then I feel like you're going to at least return up to 1, maybe 0. But if you get return up to 2, that's really nice. Step 3, though, is the one I like a lot. Being able to choose up to 3 cards in each graveyard, their own shuffle those cards into their library. That's very nice because it helps us against kind of like the rogue mill decks that's been in the format. That's actually really nice, but also like escape is a popular mechanic in standard. So being able to shuffle like say a very problematic escape card and such, that's actually really nice. What I also like about this card against mill is also, let's say you're playing like a combo deck of some sorts, and if you have a specific piece that you don't want to milled, or does get milled, then you could be able to use this as a way to recuperate slash kind of like how kind of like how Tamiyo from War of the Spark essentially was originally used to essentially bring back your combo pieces into your hand so you can go off of combos and such. It's kind of like that with this card, essentially. It's like you use it, sure, shuffling it into your library does make it a lot more slower than Tamiyo, just essentially regrowthing it, but being able to just shuffle cards to both reduce the size of your graveyard to help combat against Rogue Mill, as well as if you're a combo deck, being able to shuffle specific pieces back into your deck, that's actually very nice. Overall, I like this card, but it is a very, very niche card. Like, it's kind of like a... I think it's a 7 out of 10. I'm almost wanting to say 6.5 out of 10, because you really have to be in the snow deck to take full advantage of this card. But I could see some people that play this card just for the first step and for the third step, and I wouldn't blame them whatsoever. It's a very interesting uncommon saga that we got, so definitely safe to say one of the more interesting designs. Next up, this one's going to be pretty quick. Craven Hulk, 3 in a red, for a 4/4, Giant Coward. Hey, they printed Coward finally. That's interesting. And Craven Hulk can't block alone. Honestly, the flavor on this card is actually pretty cool, just essentially having a giant that was orphaned and then essentially raised up by goats, so he's very cautious and such. The flavor is actually really on point. As for the card itself, I mean, it's more of a curve filler in Limited that's also just kind of like a fun print joke, since, hey, we finally got the first Coward printed. You know, stuff like that. Why it goes to this card and nothing like Norn the Wary, your guess is as good as mine. But, overall, the art, though, is legit pretty dope on it. Just seeing the giant just being cautious behind the mountain, and then, like, the goats essentially on the mountain. It's actually a really nice art piece. I'm not going to deny that. Next up, one card that probably is going to be an upgrade to the Rogue or Flash decks in the format, Brine Barrow, that's how you pronounce that. Brine Barrow Intruder. It is a 1-mana Flash human rogue, and when this enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent control gets -2 and 0 until end of turn, and it's a 1/2. I feel like this has a really interesting chance to see play in the Rogue Mill deck. Now, it is a little bit catchy because the Rogue drops in the 1-drop slots is very competitive at the moment. Especially since we have the one that essentially mills cards as well, does the stat reduction, but you don't really get the flash aspect of it. That's a hard one, because on one hand it gives you an additional flash, which maybe you need more flash spells to help. Like if you're going with that one free drop creature from Courier, where whenever you cast a flash spell, you draw a card and lose a life. I'm having a brain fart on the name at the moment, but you know what I'm talking about. So, like, stuff like that, that might be the potential for this deck. Like, maybe it goes into Flash, maybe it goes into Rogues. Does it replace the Rogue that does this Flash and also mills cards when it enters the battlefield? Probably not, but still, the one strength of this card is the Flash, which can be used as a combat trick, but also in Rogue Mill can be used for shenanigans, as well as also if you have Flash-based synergies. I'm optimistic enough to give this like a 7 out of 10. I think it's good, but I do think it's really only good in the one specific deck that wants it. Okay, let's talk about probably my favorite mythic got revealed today. Orval, the All form. It is free in the blue for legendary creature Shapeshifter. It's a changeling. Nice. It's a 3/3. And it has, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. And then, when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, you then create a token that's a copy of target permanent. Okay, I just like this because there's just a lot of janky shenanigans you can do with this card. Because, mostly, let's look at this card at its base. 4 mana for a free, that's a hill giant. That's not really that great, if we're being honest. Unless for the aspect that you're taking advantage of the changeling aspect of it, which means that it can be a goblin, dinosaur, etc. If you have like any tribal-based archetypes, this card might be decent in that deck, so to speak. But mostly, let's be frank, we're taking advantage of the second part of the text and the third part of the text. Second part of the text. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery that, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, creating a token that's a copy of one of those permanents, there's just some really janky shenanigans you can do with this. Like, for example, one janky shenanigan I could think of is like, let's say, for example, let's talk about like the Transmogrify decks that are in Standard, like the Boros variation. Maybe you could go to a Jeskai variation of it, cast Transmogrify on the token. Oh, hey, the token is then going to be a copy of essentially what you Transmogrify, but you still get the Transmogrify trigger to get that late game drop. And also, thank you for the follow, Mono White Border. That is much obliged. Anyway, so for example, you can kind of like do that, still keep a token on the battlefield, as well as get your Transmogrify creature. And then later down the line, if this creature's on the battlefield, then you can have like Transmogrify on the very late game creature you try to get with that, and then create a copy like that. But then there's also other things like combat tricks that's actually really nice. Like, for example, I can imagine this going into like a blue-green stompy list, because then you could do stuff like essentially ram through, like with one of your big creatures to remove one of the opponent's creatures, and then not only just remove the opponent's creature, but also get a copy of your big stompy creature. Like, imagine getting 2 Lovestruck Beasts, 2 Elder Gargaroths. Like, I can go on, like, with the janky shenanigans you can do this. And that's not even talking about the storm shenanigans. Like, for example, let's say, like, with Mythos of Aluna in general, just being able to cast Mythos of Aluna on any permanent that you control, and now creating 2 copies rather than the original copy. That's nice. You can even do something, like, really silly, like Cleansing Wildfire your own non-basic land. Oh, no, it actually works on target land. You can even just Cleansing Fire your own land, and not only get a well, depending on if the land is tapped or not, potentially get an untapped land copy, but you also be able to draw a card out of it, which kind of works like as a semi... I'm not going to call it ramp, per se, because you are destroying your own land when you do that, but it does as a way to draw / also maybe go off with some storm shenanigans. Like, I'll be surprised if someone makes a deck where you use this and you want to Cleansing Wildfire your own land. I would be surprised, but it's an interesting food for thought at the very least. The other thing you could also use with this card, which is actually kind of silly, also remember we have stuff like Act of Treason, like steal effects in the format. So let's say, for example, the classic, you steal opponent's thing and you fling it. So not only when you fling it, you're going to deal the damage, but you also are going to get a copy of your opponent's thing. So kind of like cute synergies like that. So the fact that I was able to talk all the way through for all those cute synergies, I really like this card. It's The one thing, though, I am kind of interested about is a lot of people have been contemplating and be like, oh, I can't wait to make this my commander. And that's the one aspect where I'm curious about this card. Because as a commander, I don't know. Oh, hey, Giant Smash MTG. Thanks for the follow. It's one of those cards where. Howdy, how you holding up? But yeah, as a commander, I don't know. Like, I guess if we talk the unsummoned skull approach, you can just bounce like a lot of your own stuff, create a token copy that keeps on the battlefield and such, so you can kind of like do shenanigans with that. It's actually a really fascinating card. Like, I think it's mostly going to have its implications in standard, but I'm not going to blame anyone that's going to try to do a commander out of this deck or brawl because there's just some janky shenanigans you can do with this. As we were talking about Titan Smash MTG, there's just a lot of jank you can do with this. Like, for example, if you go into Simic midrange, you can use stuff like Ram Through or Rapid Bite, essentially, to on one of your Stompy creatures to essentially fight, as well as get a copy of your midrange creature. Like, imagine getting a second Elder Gargaroth or such. The more dumb application that I could think on this is like, actually, here's the dumbest application you can do with this. Let's say you have one of your indestructible lands. Like, let's say you found a way to make your land indestructible. You could, technically, and this is stupid, you could Cleansing Wildfire your indestructible land. It's not going to destroy because technically the target is technically, you can't destroy a land that's indestructible. You then create a copy of your indestructible land, which then essentially allows you to draw a card, so it's kind of like a growth spiral-like effect. Correct! Yes, so if we have any powerful into the battlefield creatures, it actually can work pretty well with this. Like, let's say, for example, let's say we go into Azorius and you have, that Charming Prince, and you decide to flicker your Charming Prince, and Skyclave Apparition, yes. Like, let's say you just bounce your Skyclave Apparition, or just make a copy of your Skyclave Apparition. You then essentially then make the copy, do the effect and such. There's just some really stupid shenanigans you can do with this card. Also, thank you, Meek Maestro, for the follow. Much obliged. But yeah, there's just some stupid shenanigans you can do with this card. Like, I don't know if it's going to be, competitively viable, but for jank, I am excited for this card. Enough that I'm going to give it an optimistic 8 out of 10. I'm that optimistic about it. If it gets into a competitive deck, I'll be surprised, but I like the card. This one is weird, but it's viable. Shackles of Treachery, 2 and a red for sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature until end of turn, it gains haste, and whenever this creature deals damage, destroy target equipment attached to it. It's an act of treason, so if your deck needs an act of treason-like effect, I think this is going to replace the original act of treason. Mostly in this format because we have stuff like Embercleave, and we are having a heavy emphasis on kind of like equipment matter type cards. So I could see somebody just essentially, presuming you're not dead by it, can just steal a creature with Embercleave attached to it that the opponent controls, bloop, deal some damage, boop boop, and then destroy the Embercleave, which actually is not a bad synergy with the card. Yeah, the riff on the prevalent effect on this is nice. Plus, also, it's kind of a nice flavor of just essentially the God of Thunder being angry and accidentally destroying stuff, so it's an average 7 out of 10. It depends on if your deck needs equipment-based matter synergies, like to destroy kind of like specific targeted stuff. But I could see if you already run Active Treason within your deck design, like let's say you're a Fossa steel deck, or if you're a deck that essentially steals stuff, attack, and then like Witch's Cauldron it, or stuff like that. I could see you just playing this over Active Treason just for the aspect that once you go against the one matchup where Embercleave is gone against you, steal the thing, you destroy their Embercleave, or destroy their Shadow Spell, or destroy any of the god equipments that we're seeing in the set. Ah, good that you asked. If you steal someone's creature that has Embercleave attached to it, you still get the double strike. So, just to let you know, I'm on a whiteboard, that's what happens. You steal someone's creature, and it gains what... Oh, actually, that's a good point. It gains haste, and whenever this creature deals damage... Oh, yeah, you're right. That's actually a really good point there. Because the thing is, the equipment gets destroyed, so you don't get the +1/+1 boost on the potential second damage, if there is a second damage that involves... Huh, that's actually an interesting interaction. I guess technically you only get the first strike damage. Still, you do destroy the opponent's Embercleave, which is probably going to be very relevant, so... Like I said, this one's kind of an average 7 out of 10. Like, if you play Act of Treason, you're probably going to play this over Act of Treason just because against that one matchup where you go against someone that's playing an Equipment Synergy deck. This one is... I like it, and I don't like it at the same time. I'll explain. Way down. 1 black for sorcery. As an additional cost to cast a spell, exile a creature card from your graveyard. Target creature gets negative free until end of turn. Okay, I'm going to say this right off the bat. If this was an instant, I would like this card a lot. Sorcery, no. I mean, sorcery is not bad, because yet again, we have to keep in mind Rogues is a very popular archetype in the format, and technically being able to find cards that allow you to exile cards from your graveyard to essentially get an effect of it is actually really nice. And the fact that this is more or less just a, hey, as long as I exile a creature card from my graveyard, I get negative free until end of turn for 1 mana. That's nice, right? Yes, but there's a really big cost. I think a lot of people are going to get super greedy with this and think like, oh, I'm going to cast this on turn 1 or turn 2 and such, and no you're not. No you're not. Because here's the thing. Unless you're going against the mill opponent, and we're talking about like the turn 1 Hedron Clab, and essentially they play a Fabled Passage, there's a very rare chance that you're going to play this on turn 1 or turn 2, unless you found some way to mill yourself. And yes, there is a incentivized for self-mill strategies, but I feel like this is a card that's a lot more balanced for the factor that you really can only realistically play this on maybe turn 2 if you have like a turn 1 mill plan. We're talking like stuff like the Necromancer Stockpile or something like that. Or kind of like one of those, like, you're realistically casting this on like turn 3 or later. If we're being honest, at least within standard. That being said, I'm not going to say this card's like terrible. I think it's just going to be a great limited card. In Constructed, let's be frank, there's just better removal in the format. Heartless Act, or even getting Poison the Cup. There's just a lot of better effects. If there is one way that this card might see play, is that it might help against indestructible creatures. But even then, we have like exile type spells in the format. We don't really... The reason why you don't see Way Down played as much is because there's cards like Extinction Event. There's cards like Elspeth Conquered Staff if you even splash white. There's even like Eat to Extinction, and that doesn't even see much play, so... I'm gonna give this like a 5 out of 10. Like, I don't think it's like too bad, but I don't think it's as constructively viable. I think it's a good limited card, though. And the art is actually pretty dope on it, not gonna lie. Next up, this one's pretty simple. Invoke the Divine, 2 and a white, instant destroy target artifact or enchantment, you gain 4 life. It's a reprint, we know this effect. If there's better tech cards in the format, those are usually preferred over this, but if you need it in your deck, and maybe if you're doing like a Valkyrie theme with the angels and such, and you want to have an angel tech card, sure, go ahead. This is more like a 5 to 6 out of 10. It's just like a very specific tech card. Mostly you're doing it if you need to destroy a specific clean, or if you're going to benefit off the life gain synergy within your deck design. Pretty simple, to the point. This is the one that I am going to be so frustrated in the limited. Chill Out. 2 and a blue for a snow artifact. You can spend snow and tap it to tap target artifact or creature. Okay, now let's be frank. As much as I kind of want to make the joke that, oh boy, this is just a cheaper Icy Manipulator, this is going to be so frustrating, I will say, in Limited, it will be annoying, but not as annoying as Icy Manipulator. I think Mono White Border actually pointed this out, but the factor is, in Draft and Limited, you have to draft the snow lands. You're not automatically be like, oh, I can fill all my lands with snow lands. No. You do have to draft the snow lands. So, as well as drafting this, you have to also draft the appropriate snow lands to be able to activate this ability. So unless you can get a majority of snow lands to be able to essentially use this efficiently, then the card itself is like, until you get a snow permanent that produces snow mana, kind of becomes a dead card. That being said, once you have both the snow source, the snow permanent to produce snow mana, and this out, oh boy, it's Icy Manipulator all over again, and everybody knows how frustrating that Icy Manipulator can be. So yeah, it's like a 7 out of 10, maybe 8 out of 10 in Limited, but it's a 7 out of 10. It'll be very fascinating, though. Okay, let's talk about the card that made every aggro and mid-range player just had a little ounce of salt in their system. Doomscar. 5 mana for a sorcery spell. Destroy all creatures. But wait, it has Foretell for 3 mana. So, like, as we know with Foretell, for those who are new to the stream and don't know what Foretell is, basic catch 22, you spend 2 mana to invest in the spell, you exile it face down, and then you can spend it later for the Foretell cost. Oh boy, this card is going to be so obnoxious. Oh, where do I begin with this card? Okay. Now, is this card as busted as people are saying? No. Is it really, really, really good? Yes. As stated before, the main reason why this card is very, very powerful is just the factor that you are essentially, when you're playing this in the control deck, you are going to be playing a mind game now with your opponent if you're playing white such. Oh yeah, it's good. Like I said, it's a good card. Like, it's not busted, but it's really good. You're going to now be playing a mind game with your opponent with this card. More or less what you're going to be doing with your opponent when they play this card is essentially when you foretell something on turn 2, because most people are going to be trying to foretell something on turn 2, that's going to make the aggro and mid-range player a little bit cautious now, especially if they see white within your mana base, because they'll be like, okay, do I want to build up my board presence and then have to deal with the inevitable Doomscar on turn 3? Or should I be cautious and see about that? Like, the fact that that's going to make opponents be, like, very cautious about how they present their creature base because of the potential of a free mana board wipe, that's nothing to sneeze at. Plus, also, the versatility of this late game is nothing to underestimate. You just foretell it, and then you hold on it, 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 until later down the line when you can cast it for 3 mana and then maybe build back your board presence with a cheap creature or a cheap enchantment and such. That's nothing to underestimate. Exactly, Junipe plays. It's going to make the opponent, when you foretell this card, your opponent's going to be ridiculously cautious about whether or not they want to build into their board presence. That's the strength of this card, because the fact that people know that this card exists is the fact that they know they have to be very cautious when building their board presence. Like, the fact that we have a lot of powerful creatures in the format that make it where you can win by turn 4, turn 5 pretty easy in some deck designs. The fact that this exists is actually really nice for control players. That being said, if you're a mid-range and aggro player, you might find this card a teeny bit frustrating, but I will offer the rebuttal that, yet again, this one's it's just kind of like one of those cards where you just have to play around it. You just have to be careful with your board presence. Maybe you have to incorporate more indestructible creatures within your deck design, like we're talking Seasoned Howlblade, that puppy, stuff like that. So you have to be very cautious about just how you build your mid-range and aggro decks when you're going against mono white, because, or any pretty much Azorius or even like Boros control decks, because, well, this exists. If there is one con to the card, and it's one that's not really brought up, it really is only going to be good in control decks. Like, a lot of people are going to, and I think Sheepwave actually pointed this out pretty well, at least for EDH in general. A lot of people are going to essentially, more or less for EDH, kind of like accidentally put this in their aggro decks when really, realistically, they should be putting more creature presence and such in their deck designs. And that's kind of the thing here. But yeah, it's just a control dog card, maybe in mid-range if your mid-range strategy builds up on turn 4 or 5 and such, and you just are going to sandbag until you build up your mid-range strategy. Nevertheless, though, it's a good, 9 out of 10 card. Like, it is going to see standard play. Like, just a free mana board wipe. Nothing to underestimate. Nothing to underestimate whatsoever. Next up, probably the best rare of the set? Righteous Valkyrie, 2 in a white for a Angel Cleric 2/4 with flying. Okay, so it's decent stats, but what does it do? Well, it has flying and has whenever another Angel or Cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And then as long as you have at least 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. And remember, if you have multiple copies of this on the battlefield, that effect stacks. Oh, this card is so good. This card is so nutty. Okay, first of all, this is good for Eternal formats. Like, I'm also going to talk about Standard, maybe even some Commander applications, but this is a card that is going to see play in multiple formats, especially if your deck is in any way a life gain synergy deck whatsoever. Because mostly what it's going to do is essentially does the following thing. You're going to spend free mana. You're going to essentially put this on the battlefield, boop, and then essentially anytime you get a cleric or angel on the battlefield, you're going to gain life equal to this creature's toughness. You know how a lot of people were kind of giving crap about that mythic that we were talking about, the Starnheim Unleashed, which creates multiple angel tokens? The reason why I didn't give much crap about it and actually was really optimistic was because, yes, this was initially a leaked card, so I know this card existed. And I remember about this card, and I was like, wait a minute. So, if you can create about 2 angels with Starnheim Unleashed, you're going to get 2 4/4s, which then is going to give you 8 life. Not to mention, one other aspect of this card, if you actually meet the condition of just being 7 or more life, which is going to be really easy in a life gain deck, especially in clerics and also just mono white life gain or even Orzhov life gain in general, you are going to get the actual extra life boost because your creatures are going to enter in with the stat boost, which then gives you more life. And also just being a 2/4 by its stat alone is good. Just, I don't know how much to stress it. This card is one of the more nuttier cards of the set. It's going to see play in clerics. It's going to see play if Angel Tribal is going to exist. It's because this card exists. It's a really, really, really good card. Like, it's a 10 out of 10. Like, 10 out of 10. This card is probably going to be a sought-after rare of the set, especially for people who like Angel Tribal shenanigans, who like cleric shenanigans. It's really, 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 really good. Like, 10 out of 10. No sweat about it. You're going to see this card a lot. Next up, Dragonkin Berserker. 1 in a red for a human berserker with first strike. It's a 2/2. And it's... Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. In limited, the angel is definitely a pack 1, pick 1. Absolutely. Anyway, Dragonkin Berserker. 1 in a red for a 2/2 with first strike. So, not bad. Oh, and it also has both abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate for each dragon you control. Okay, very specific. But there's more. This creature also has boast of 4 in a red. Create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. Yeah, this is a really good bear. This is a bear with upside, everybody. This is good and limited, first off, because a 2/2 with first strike, that's a bear, perfectly fine. And then the fact that it has this mana sink ability later in the game that you can make dragons, which then, thanks to the dragons and this, essentially will make your boast abilities cost less. That is very, very nice. In Constructed, I see a chance with this card. Mostly just because we have some really good dragons in the format. We are going to have dragons in the format, like that Mirror Dragon and such. That is... Oh, that Mirror Dragon is so absurd. That Mirror Dragon is so absurd. Like, we have a lot of good dragons in the format already, so being able to just cast this out any turn, like casting this on turn 2 for aggro, really nice. And then just essentially later down the line, you could just cast this later down in the game. And then essentially attack with it later, and then essentially get a dragon out of it. That's nice. If there is one catch to the card, is that it does not have haste, so you either have to give this haste, or you have to hope that it doesn't get removed later down the line and such, because a lot of people are going to look at this and being like, yeah, this is a pretty significant threat that they're going to have to deal with ASAP. But overall, this is optimistic. It's like a 8 out of 10. It's really good. Specifically in the boast decks, and specifically in any Dragon Tribal decks, but also just in general, it's just a really decently aggressive-oriented card for the boast-type deck designs. Next up, oh boy, this one's going to be one that I'm going to be talking about for a bit, so grab a seat, grab a drink. You're going to hear me talk about this card for a teeny little bit. The card, as we see at the moment, is Dream Devourer. 1 and a black for a creature demon cleric. It's a 0 free, which, okay. It's not great stats, let's just put that right off the bat. But it has some interesting effects. Each non-land card in your hand without Foretell has Foretell. So, any non-land card you have in your hand has Foretell. Keep that in mind. Nets. Its Foretell cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 2. Makes sense. You initially spend 2 mana in, the spell is going to be 2 mana less. Makes sense. And then during your turn, and then yeah, it has the Foretell text, and then whenever you foretell a card, Dream Devourer gets +2/+0 until end of turn. I'm going to be legit honest with you all. I think this card is absolutely busted. Here's the thing. It's not busted because it's 0 free, because yeah, that's not even close. It's not even busted because of the Foretell effect. It's busted because it makes all non-land cards in the game have Foretell. Which at first glance you're like, okay, what's the point? Why is that busted? Well, here's the thing. The reason why this is busted is because, here's the thing. The factor is that all cards have Foretell makes some cards that are relatively balanced for their mana costs become more busted because you can now play them earlier than you usually would if you don't mind initially spending the 2 mana cost to do the Foretell. How do I mean? Like, let's say, for example, Planeswalkers. Like, you know how we see a majority of Planeswalkers in the set that are relatively balanced for their design, like essentially costing like 5 mana, 4 mana, a variety of good Planeswalkers? Now, let's take like Kaya in the format. Kaya's a 5 mana Planeswalker. So, now imagine foretelling Kaya and being able to cast that on turn 3. Well, technically you're going to cast it on turn 4 because you first have to cast this on turn 2, but you kind of getting what I'm getting at here. It takes cards that are originally balanced by their perspective, essentially being able to be played off curve. That is nuts. Like, here's another example. Now imagine Rewind. Rewind is a good card in the format. It costs 4 mana. Now imagine being able to foretell that on turn 3, and then just being able to Rewind on turn 3, and then still have mana hold up for like a card draw spell, or like any like target removal. I'll agree to disagree if you Genevieve plays, but I do respect your opinion on that. And out of the stuff, like, there's some really stupid stuff when you consider the factor that this also works with kicker spells. Because keep in mind, when you foretell, you're just casting the card. So you can cast the card for the discounted, and then have mana for kicker. Oh, and also, now imagine stuff like the very heavy high-cost spells that are usually balanced because they're like 6 or 7 mana. Now imagine being able to play those on turn 4, 5, or 6. Like, for example, imagine playing Sublime Epiphany on turn 4. Yes, I will agree, if there is one con with the card, is the fact that the curve is a little awkward. But, I don't know, I feel like this card is just a little silly. Like, I feel like the fact that it gives all your cards foretell, and can allow you to play some cards that are originally balanced because of a specific curve, being able to play them later. I feel like that's really good. Like, also there's the aspect of it that essentially, when you play in the discount for the foretelled on some cards, there's some cards that get relatively better if you can play them early, but then have enough mana left to actually protect it. Like, let's say, for example, let's say, like, you foretell, say, an Elder Gargaroth. Like, I know that's a weird example. So then Elder Gargaroth is going to cost free. You play it on turn 4. You have then 1 mana to essentially protect it from spot removal. It's like stuff like that where I feel like it's busted. I feel like the mana discount for being able to invest in a card early that is not originally designed to be a foretelled card is what makes this busted. Plus, also, it's a cleric, so you might be able to make a foretelled cleric deck, potentially. Granted, I need to more sprue around that and figure that out, but I just feel like, or even worse, like, imagine Elspeth Conquers Death on turn, like, 4. And then still having 1 mana to, like, do a cantrip or something. That is true. I just feel like this mechanic, just being able to play some more powerful cards off curve, is going to be a lot more busted than people take at first glance. Now, on the Catch 22, it is still a 2-drop. You still have to wait. Oh, and also remember one card that we talked about previously in a previous review. Cosmo Charger is a card, so I feel like if there's a deck that's going to be annoying, is that a deck that has both Cosmo Charger and this in it, because then you can foretell on the opponent's turn. I don't know. Like, I'm going to be very optimistic and like give this a high 9. I think it's that good, but I am willing to admit I could be wrong. Maybe this card's too awkward. Maybe it's just going to be an automatic like super threat that people know what you're going to do with it and they're going to remove it like that, which then makes it not really great because it's one of those cards where it's like a super threat that if it's not answered automatically, then you're in pickle. But I don't know. Like, I feel like this card... Oh, yeah, it's a... Well, I don't know. It might be a dud in Limited. I definitely agree with you there. But still, yet again, in Limited, it gives you some cards' ability to give Foretell that you would usually not give Foretell, so... great. Hang on. I gotta figure out how to delete these bot comments. One moment. Yeah, on it. On it. Why do there have to be bots? There we go. Block. There we go. Yeah, I agree, Granada. They are very obnoxious. Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to report this one too. Spam. Or bot account. Nets. I think this is a bot account. Nets. It's doing bot advertising. Submit report. Close. Okay, sorry, this is going to be... We're going to take a quick minute to just essentially... Sure, let's see. Let me give you mod privileges. Hang on a minute. I need to research this because it's been a minute since I did this. So, hang on a minute. Give Twitch. Give mod. Moderator. There we go. Oh yeah, I know. That's why I trust you on being the mod here. I wouldn't be giving it to a random stranger. Okay, that's what it is. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Now that we got that, I gotta exit out of this because that's a little embarrassing post that. Bots. You gotta love them and you gotta hate them at the same time. Ugh. Anyway. Distraction aside, let's talk about a pretty quick card. Imstrom Raider, 2-drop. It's a 2-1. When this enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. It's a Demon Berserker. This one's pretty simple. It's like a 5 to 6 out of 10. It's mostly for limited. If you need a looter, it's a looter. If you need a Berserker, that's there for the Berserker matter cards that are in the set. So, you gotta keep that in mind. So, yeah. It's a fine card, but it's not like going to light the world on fire, so to speak, so... Even though there is fire in the art, but, you know, pun aside. Next up, Jar of the Forsaken. Free in the black for a zombie cleric with flash, and when this enters the battlefield, destroy target creature... Yeah, I guess Mono Red Demons could try that card out, that's a good point. Well, not the Jar, but the card we were talking about previously. And then this has, when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature or planeswalker in opponent's control that was dealt damage this turn. It has Foretell of 2, and it's a free 2. This is fine. It's not amazing, but it's fine. The thing you gotta keep in mind with these type of cards is we had very similar effects of these cards. Like, we had the Vraska one for free mana. And the factor is you have to pay 4 mana for this, for Flash is kind of eh. But you can foretell it, which is nice. It's also a zombie and a cleric, if that matters within your deck designs. It's like an optimistic, sits out of 10. It's not bad, but you have to be in the right deck that can get the damage dealt and would like a Flash zombie that does this effect. Though Flash Tribal is a thing, so it's something to keep in mind. Next up, one of the more interesting commons we got in the set. Skull Raid. Free and a black for a sorcery. Target opponent discards 2 cards. So it's a more expensive Mind Rod, eh? Well, there's more. It has, if fewer than 2 cards were discarded this way, you draw cards equal to the difference, and it has Foretell with 1 and a black. This is interesting, because one thing is, a majority... the Ixalan dog that did this and everyone got mad about. I know what you're talking about, like Ravenous Chupacabra, but no, it's not that. Ravenous was a Flame-Tongue Kavu. I know what you're talking about, but I'm having a brain fart on it. Anyway, but yeah. Essentially, Skull Raid, it's interesting because most Mind Rot spells, the main con with Mind Rot spells in general, is you do get to a point in the game where essentially you are making your opponent top deck, and they're just going to play what they have, and they're going to have an empty hand, aka Hellbent. So then it makes your Mind Rot card spells kind of dead. Unless you have like a Rummaging-like effect, or like a way to discard your card to draw more cards, stuff like that. So what this card does is, it does give you a Mind Rot that's a little bit more expensive, but in the exchange of the fact that it's not a dead card later down the line. Like, if your opponent's empty-handed, this is 4 mana, draw 2 cards. Like, are there better draw card spells in the format? Yes. Is this one not bad? No. Like, this one's like an average, I would say, 7 out of 10. It's good, but it needs to be in a very specific deck that wants this discard effect, and I could even see some people just sideboarding it. But foretelling it is nice, I'm not going to lie about that. The foretelling aspect of this card is really, really nice. Next one, this one's pretty quick. Demonic Gifts. 1 in a black for a instant. Until in a turn, target creature gets +2/+0, and it gains when this creature dies, return it to the battlefield under its own control. This one's pretty simple. It's more like a 5-ish out of 10. Or even higher, depending on if you are in a deck that wants this combat trick effect. It's more of a good limited card. It is also a good pop card. Not going to lie on that one. It's also a pretty decent pop card. But, honestly, it just really depends on if you need this type of card in your deck design. If you don't, then really there are better combat tricks in the format, like in Standard, if we're talking specifically here. That being said, the stat boost does help this out a lot to help it against, like, make it good against combat tricks and such, so that's something to keep in mind. You know what, I'll be optimistic and actually give this a 6 out of 10 because I did forgot the stat boost does kind of help it make it a more effective combat trick. So yeah, 6 out of 10. I think I already talked about this, but just for the sake of clarity, with the combat trick, not that I can think of. Like, there's no infinite way you can do it. At least not that I can think of right off the bat. But it's a good food for thought there, JBB plays. That is a good food for thought. Anyway, Port of Carfell. It's a land that enters the battlefield tap. You add it for blue mana. But it also has an activated ability of free 1 blue, 2 black, and tap it itself. So this effect is 7 mana. However, you sacrifice the land, and then mill 4 cards, then return a card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, pretty much what JBB play says. This is going to be a commander card without a sweat. Because this is a really powerful effect, just being able to sacrifice a land, mill some cards if you need to, and then return a very powerful card from your deck into the battlefield. Granted, that's a very powerful effect. And the best part is, it does enter in tapped, but you can do this effect at... Okay, we'll say Juniper for the sake of it. Just the factor that this can be activated at instant speed is what makes this card really nutty. Just the fact that you can do this at the end of the opponent's turn, mill your cards, get your biggest threat from the battlefield, and it's just essentially bring it, and then just be able to attack that turn. That's very good. This is a card that I'm very optimistic. Like, it's an 8 out of 10. it does need to go in the right decks that can get up to 7 mana to activate the effect, and don't mind that they're sacrificing a land to get this effect. But in reanimated based strategies, I can see it. This card is actually really cool. Next up, whoo, boy, let's talk about this card. Burgi, the God of Storytelling. 2 and a red for a legendary creature god. It's a 3/3. It also has, whenever you cast a spell, add 1 red generic mana. Until in a turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases in. Creatures control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than this one. And then it can also be the Hornfell, I think is how you pronounce it. Forgive me, like I said, I'm going to butcher this a little bit. Hornfell, Horn of Bounty. 4 and a red to discard a card outside of the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. Okay, let's just go by first talking about the front side. And yeah, as everybody's pretty much saying, yes, the front side of this card is absolutely busted. It is so busted, it's not even funny. Okay, first of all, I think the reason why they have that effect is actually, if we're talking about in limited perspective, it's just to be cute. Because, for example, this is actually they want you to put this in a boast deck. It's very synergistic with boast, because, oh, they're telling the story, a creature comes on the battlefield, you cast a spell, and then you get the red mana, and let's say you already have a creature with boast on the battlefield. Well, that red mana doesn't get lost, so then you can actually use it to activate your boast ability, and then tell a glorious tale, especially if you have multiple mana sources, and boast twice. Like, the flavor is pretty nice. However, let's be frank, the reason why this card is busted is because it can be used in Storm. Oh dear, the amount of Storm shenanigans you could do with the front side of this card is nutty. Remember, we have a lot of cards, like, if we go into Eternal formats, like, there's a lot of cards that are, like, ritual effects that can give us excess mana. So just being able to get 1 additional mana every time we cast a ritual effect, that's very nutty. That is something to not underestimate. We even have a semi-ritual effect in the format that's coming up, like that Open the Omen Pass and such. So, even that adventure spell, that elf, that 1 green elf that essentially you use it for filtering, well, now that becomes a lot better, because even though you're going to filter a green mana to get another mana, with both of God of Storytelling on there, you're not going to get 1 red mana. And don't underestimate the fact that you're going to get additional mana, because that means you can cast more spells, which then gives you more mana, which then essentially, just the amount of stupid plays you could do with this card is nutty. Also, one thing that I think people are going to miss with this card, you can also essentially, if you need to, you can cast this card, or you can cast a spell, add the red mana, and use that for, like, activated abilities, or even, hint hint, wink wink, nod nod, foretell spells. I will say, yeah, the mana ramp for the potential of this card is pretty, like, it feels dumb. But, I don't know, like, it's an interesting card in that sense. Like, it's definitely busted, but I'm kind of curious to see if someone can break the card. They probably are going to, at least in Eternal formats. In Standard, maybe? The problem is we don't have that much zero-cost spells in the format other than that Foretell card that we were talking about earlier and such, so... Okay, now let's talk about the backside. Yes, the backside is the least exciting part of it, but it's not bad. Harmful Horn of Bounty. Discarding a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play that cards those turn. Now, the reason why you exile the cards rather than just draw 2 cards is because they don't want this to be broken. Because the thing is, technically, they don't want it to be like, oh, you discard a card, draw 2 cards, then you discard a card, draw 2 cards, and then essentially be able to draw out your entire deck. That being said, the fact that it synergizes so well with the front part should not be underestimated. Because here's the thing, we have a lot of cheap cantrips in the format. We have Opt, we have even that 1 red instant spell that gives all your creatures trample and you draw a card. Like, we have a lot of cheap cantrips in the format. So being able to essentially, like, let's say we get the red mana from casting the spell, let's say for even just casting the horn itself. We cast the horn, generate the red mana thanks to the front part of the god card, thanks to Burgi. We get the red mana, we then essentially, like, discard a land card we don't need from our hand, we exile 2 cards, we get one of those cheap cantrip spells. And then essentially, then what we can do is cast a cheap cantrip spell, which then will draw a card, which then is going to replace the original card we discarded, and then do the effect again. And then do it again, and do it again, and again, and again, And again. Oh yeah, and also in Cleansing Wildfire is kind of absurd too, because that gives you mana. Oh, this card is so busted. Like it's a relatively safe 10 out of 10, I will say. Like someone's going to break this, whether or not it's going to be in standard or internal formats, we'll see, but it's a pretty. Oh yeah, and this card with Wheel of Fortune is unbelievable. So yeah, get prepared for this card. You're going to see this card a lot. Next up, the Bloodscore Massacre. It's one black and a red for a enchantment saga. It has the following effects. Turn 1. You create a 2/3 red demon berserker creature token with a menace. Step 2. Whenever a berserker attacks its turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. And then, step 3, add red mana for each berserker you control until in a turn you don't lose this mana steps or phases in. Yeah, Juniper, that's pretty good. Yeah, it is kind of that card of the set. Anyway, first of all, the art on this is actually pretty legit, being like tattoo art and such, telling the story. That's cool. Now, let's go through the effects. Okay, this is kind of like one of the cards I was mentioning before if you wanted to try Berserker Tribal. This is kind of like one of the payoff cards for Berserker Tribal, because it's not a bad effect in general. Creating tokens first step, perfectly fine. I'm still kind of surprised it doesn't have flying, but Menace is still pretty good. Evasive threat, essentially. Then step 2, whenever a Berserker attacks, aka it could be the token, it could be more Berserkers you have, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So just being able to just draw at least 1 card from this, perfectly fine. And then step 3, adding 1 mana for each Berserker you control until in a turn, blah 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 blah. That's pretty good, especially if your deck has like any bow space strategies or any strategies that is a ramp strategy. That's really nice. So I will agree with you, Granetta, on that one. The one con with a majority of these sagas is that seems to be a case of if you cast it by itself, you do have to be very, very, very reliant on the factor that your token slash is not going to die. Like the Raven's Calling, you gotta hope that the bird doesn't die, or you gotta hope that you have another flyer. And this one's kind of like the same thing. You gotta hope that Berserker doesn't die, or you gotta hope you have another Berserker. I'm a little bit more optimistic on this since we do have Berserkers in the format that do have haste. I'm thinking stuff like I think Arnie is a Berserker if I remember correct, but I know there are Berserkers in the format that have haste, so I'm a little optimistic on that even if they destroy the token here, you still have a hasty Berserker you can cast next turn on the second step, and still replace the effect. But yeah, this is more like a janky brew card that has a slim base potential to be competitively viable, like a slim chance. Like, if someone can make a Berserker Tribal deck work, then it's a really good card for the deck. So, it's like a 7 out of 10. It's good, but it's not, like, broken. It's very balanced for what you're getting out of this. Yeah, that is kind of the ironic thing of it. It seems like Revisa Kodai is like, I want to make mono red Berserkers. And it seems like all the Berserker cards are red or black or both. Next up, okay, let's talk about this card because I think it's a little overhyped, but I don't think it's bad. Imstrom Skullcairn. It's a land, enters in tap, add it for red. You could spend technically 5 mana, that's including tapping it. And then you sacrifice this, it deals 3 damage to target player. That player discards a card, activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. Okay, so many people are comparing this to Laminate Ruins, it's not even funny. And here's the thing. It's not a Ramnap Ruins. Here's the reason why. The reason why this is not Ramnap Ruins is the fact that it enters in tapped. The reason why Ramnap Ruins was such a powerful card in Standard, even to the point that it got banned, was the fact that you could have it enter in on tap. Which means that if you need to, you can activate the Bolt ability the same turn you play the land. You can't do that with this card. You have to wait a turn, and then you do the Bolt. That being said, yes, and it's also a repeatable effect. That's another good point, because the factor is you can sacrifice any desert. You don't have to just sacrifice Ramnap Ruins to get the effect. This one, you have to sacrifice this land and get the effect once. So, I'm not saying it's a bad card. I think it's not bad. Because if you are in a deck that is Rakdos aggro, and you don't mind like having to turn off in theory, you could play this and then later down the turn, once you get to that point that is you need to get the last free damage. Okay, but to be frank, I don't even think you want to do that because tap lands and aggro decks are very costly. Maybe if you play a mid-range discard deck, like I'm talking stuff like you're playing like Turgid, then I could see people trying this card. But if you're not playing like a mid-range deck, I would say avoid this card. Like this is like a, I know so many people were so high on this card, but I'm going to like give it like a 4 out of 10. It's not that good. It's not bad, but it's not that good. Like it's a 4 out of 10. Oh yeah, this ain't taking standard one little bit. But in casual formats, it's a good budget option. Next up, Icehide Troll. 2 and a green for a snow creature troll warrior. It has 2 snow to essentially activate with 2 snow. This gets +2 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Then you tap it. Not bad for limited, I would say. Just a 3 mana ice troll that's essentially a 2 free that if you have snow mana, you can pump it up. That is very nice. Yeah, I guess maybe I should be a lot more generous and just give it a 5 out of that discard land, but going back to the troll, yeah, this is a pretty good limited playable card. Now, it's not going to be amazing in limited, because you got to keep in mind, you do have to draft the snow permanents, like the snow lands, to generate the snow mana. So, if you don't get any snow mana, and you can cut this card, cut this card. But if you do draft any snow cards and such, and you can play this card on curve, perfectly fine card. In constructed, nah, there's just better snow creatures that are going to be coming into the format. There are better snow payoffs. I mean, maybe for a budget deck, I could see people trying the Icehide Troll, but mostly for budget decks, so I'll be optimistic and say like a 6 out of 10 because this is still a really good limited card. But for constructed, nah. Though I will admit, the art is pretty good. And yeah, Juniper, it's really fun art. Next up, Provoke the Trolls. So, in other words, go to a random internet site that has a bunch of trolls here. Anyway, 3 and a red for an instant. It deals free damage to any target. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it gets 5-0 until end of turn. I like this card for limited, I'll say that. Yes, 4 mana for a lightning strike is a crap ton. But the factor is you can either use this to deal the final damage to your opponent, or if you have a very good mid-range creature that's above free toughness, being able to essentially give it a +5 boost and deal 5 damage to your opponent. That's actually really nice, I'm not gonna lie. So like in an aggro-based deck that is limited, I can see this card seeing play. In constructed, probably not, but I could see an argument of people trying it in like decks that have like an additional effect of like storming off with this card. I don't know if there's any deck that does that, but who knows? Like, I think the only way you would play this in standard is in a ramp deck of sorts, and you're only going to take advantage of the aspect that you're going to deal damage to your theme and get additional damage dealt to something. Like, let's say, for example, I think the only deck that could play this type of card is like a Brash Taunter deck. Because you play Brash Taunter on turn 5, you then provoke the Brash Taunter on your turn, you then essentially deal free damage redirected to your opponent, but also that, you're also giving it a +5 attack boost and attacking for 6, and your opponent has to decide whether or not they want to block or not, but then if they don't, they're going to take 6 damage, but if they do block, they are still going to take damage from Brash Taunter. It's kind of like those type of decks that will take advantage of this card. I'll be optimistic and give it like a 6 out of 10, because there's definitely some really good applications for the card, but I'm not like totally over the floor by it, if that makes sense. We're on to our last 2 cards. I'll save this one for last, so let's talk about this one. Draga Thought Thief. 2 and a black for a zombie rogue. So, rogue decks, keep note. It has, when this enters the battlefield, look at the top card of a target player's library. You may put that card into their graveyard. It's a free 2. Perfectly fine card. It's actually a perfectly fine card. Mostly, I think this is mostly going to see limited play, but this is a really good limited card. Don't underrate that. Remember, opponent's decks are 40 cards. You'd be able to play this early, you'd be able to play this late, and the fact that you can look at your top opponent's library and such, and take out a very problematic card if they have it on the top of their deck. And even then, it's a choice. Like, if the opponent has a land and you don't mind them getting a land, you can just leave it on top. So the versatility is nice. It trades up, which is nice. So, yeah, great limited card. Constructed, I mean, the problem is there's just better free drops in the format. There are better rogues in the format. There are better zombies in the format. I could see people giving this a shot in like Flicker-based decks still, just as a cute way to essentially try to take out like problematic tutored cards. But that's like a very slim like technical case there. Like, I don't think this will see play in Constructed, but in Limited, absolute all-star. So it's like a 6 out of 10. Next up, Blood on the Snow. 6 mana for a snow sorcery. You choose 1. Destroy all creatures, or destroy all planeswalkers. And then it has, then return a creature or planeswalker card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield where X is the amount of snow spent to cast this spell. I think the card's actually pretty good. Now, I will admit, 6 mana for a Wrath effect is pretty costly, but this is kind of like a Yawgmoth's Will, where it's essentially a board wipe and a return effect is pretty nice. Also, keep in mind, this is where we get back to the one controversial card. You can actually cast this for 4 mana if you, I don't know, do a Dream Devourer and foretell that spell. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod. Now, granted, yes, if you do... Okay, let me get back to the card. Now, yes, if you only do that, you're going to reanimate a card of 4 or less. Yes, but that's not bad in general. Yeah, you get a 4-drop, but let's be frank. If you're playing it in the type of deck, we have a lot of really good 3 and 4-drops in the format. Like, yeah, getting a 6-drop is nice, but let's be frank. A majority of 4 cards in the format that are constructed viable are between the 2 and the 5 range. Getting a 6-drop is nice, don't get me wrong, but it's not absolutely necessary. And yes, being able to get a Planeswalker is also nice, but you do have to also look at the Planeswalkers in the format. Like, the factor is, at the current moment, the biggest Planeswalker that this can get is technically a Garruk, which is not bad. That's actually really good. You could also get a Vivian, etc., etc. True. Like I said, like, if you had to choose over this over Doomscar, you would obviously pick up the Doomscar one, no sweat. However, if you do have a Reanimator-based package within your deck design, or you need to bring back your combo pieces or such, I can see people trying Blood on the Snow. Is it as good as Doomscar? No. But I can see applications for it. Plus, also, there is the tech aspect of it, where you can just keep it in your sideboard, and then sideboard it in when you're going against a Super Friends list, or going to go against a list where you feel like it's better that you can reanimate something and you know your opponent doesn't have graveyard hate, so... Like, I'll give it an optimistic, 7.5 out of 10. I'm almost wanting to give it an 8 out of 10. But I do feel like this card does have a little bit of chance, especially if snow decks work. And they don't mind having a Reanimator-based package. Because you don't mind doing this as sorcery speed, especially if you return a Planeswalker, which then you could just activate the Planeswalker after the sorcery speed Wrath effect. And I think that's all the cards that have been revealed so far, at least of this stream. We'll talk about more when the set gets revealed on Wednesday, and also a little bit tomorrow if more cards get revealed. I'm hoping that they talk more about runes and such, because I really wanted to see about the rune mechanic and such. Nevertheless, I now got to actually do some quick chores and get ready for work tomorrow, so thanks for all who attended the stream. Thank for Meek Maestro. Thanks you, Time Smash MTG. Thank you, Mono White Border. Thank you... Rod Johnson, MTG Joe D, Jay Sheen, Mercury Brew for following tonight. You all been lovely. You all have a lovely night. I'll try to get this up on YouTube as soon as I can. See y'all later. Bada beep. Bada boop.